Take his kidney now, doctor. Our daughter needs to live. My mother's voice cut through the hospital silence like a cold knife, while I pretended to be sedated in the bed next to him. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady, even as I felt my heart race. The smell of disinfectant mixed with a cold sweat on my own skin constantly reminded me of where I was, a hospital bed in Seattle, with tubes coming out of my body and machines beeping beside me. Mr. and Mrs. Chun, we need to consider that Tyler is also in critical condition, the doctor replied in a tired voice. He lost a lot of blood in the accident. Removing the second kidney would be extremely risky. Risky? My father interrupted sharply, his voice heavy with impatience. Doctor, Tyler has always been a dead weight. At least this way he'll be good for something in his life. My name is Tyler Chun, I'm 23 years old, and I just found out that my own parents are willing to sacrifice me to save my younger sister Sarah. The car accident happened 3 days ago when a runaway truck hit our Honda Civic. Sarah is in severe kidney failure, and I already donated a kidney to her 2 years ago when she had her first crisis. Tyler has always been trouble since he was a child, my mother muttered, as if justifying a business decision. Sarah has a bright future ahead of her, doctor. She was accepted to Stanford Medical School. We can't let her die because of him. Her words pierced my chest deeper than any injury from the accident. There I was, pretending to be in a medically induced coma, listening to my parents plan my death with the same coldness they would discuss what to do with an old car. My heart monitor spiked slightly, but no one seemed to notice. I'm going to need to consult with the hospital ethics committee, the doctor sighed heavily. This isn't a decision I can make on my own, especially considering Tyler has already made a previous donation. Do whatever it takes, my father said authoritatively. But do it quickly. We don't want him waking up and complicating things unnecessarily. Complicate things. That was my life summed up in 3 words by the man who was supposed to protect me. A tear rolled down the corner of my eye, but I controlled my breathing so as not to give myself away. They couldn't find out that I was listening to every poisonous word. When the voices faded down the hallway, I slowly opened my eyes. The white hospital ceiling seemed endless, but my mind was already racing in completely different directions. They wanted my second kidney for Sarah? Perfect. But what they didn't know was that I had recorded every word of that conversation on my cell phone, hidden under my pillow. What they also had no idea was that I had access to devastating information about the Chin family. Information I had been gathering for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. Documents, recordings, evidence that could completely destroy the untouchable reputation they had built in Seattle's Chinese community. If you're enjoying this story of family betrayal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this situation changed my life forever and how I turned their attempt to eliminate me into the most calculated revenge I've ever executed. As the nurses checked my vital signs every 2 hours, I began to mentally devise something they would never expect. Because if there was one thing my parents were right about, it was that I was trouble. They just hadn't seen anything I was capable of yet. Over the next few days, while pretending to be sedated, I learned more about my parents than I had in 23 years of life. They visited Sarah upstairs with fresh flowers, imported chocolates, and whispered sweet nothings about how everything would be okay. With me, they appeared briefly to sign medical papers, always talking to each other as if I were an object in the room. The doctor said Tyler is stable, my mother whispered to my father during one of these quick visits. At least he's good for something, right? Sarah needs to get back to her studies soon. She can't miss a semester at Stanford because of this whole situation. My father adjusted his expensive tie, the one I had given him for Father's Day, with the money I had saved from working part-time. It's a shame to waste 2 healthy kidneys on someone who will never amount to anything. Tyler has always been limited. At least this way he's contributing to Sarah's bright future. Limited. The word echoed in my mind like a punch in the stomach. Was that how they had seen me all these years? While Sarah took private lessons in Mandarin, violin, and programming, I worked at the neighborhood laundromat to pay for my own school books. When she got a MacBook Pro to help with her studies, I used a second-hand laptop that crashed every 5 minutes. The difference in treatment had always been there, but I attributed it to Sarah being younger and more fragile because of her kidney problems. Now I realized it was something much deeper and more cruel. I was the disposable son, the backup plan, the spare part for when Sarah needed replacement parts. Dr. Morrison called, my mother said, checking her cell phone. He said the ethics committee is meeting tomorrow to discuss the case. We need to prepare a convincing presentation on why Tyler should donate his second kidney. I'll call our lawyer, my father replied coldly. I'm sure we can find a legal loophole. Tyler is of legal age, but if we can prove that he doesn't have the mental capacity to make complex medical decisions due to the trauma of the accident. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to force the donation. My own family was conspiring to turn me into a pile of useful organs. My heart monitor spiked slightly, but I controlled my breathing before anyone noticed. That's when I started to remember all the strange coincidences in my life. Like how my SAT scores mysteriously disappeared before college applications, forcing me to retake the test and miss deadlines for the best schools. Like how my scholarship application was rejected for incomplete documentation that I was sure I had sent correctly. Like how whenever I got a good opportunity, an internship, a job, a relationship, something inexplicably went wrong. Now it all made sense. They had systematically sabotaged every chance I had to build an independent future. They needed me to remain dependent, available, disposable. Sarah was always the shining star, destined for greatness. I was just the spare brother, kept around for medical emergencies. What they didn't know was that during all those years of humiliation and sabotage, I developed two skills they never suspected: extremely keen observation and strategic patience. While they underestimated me, I documented everything. Accidentally recorded conversations, saved emails, photographed documents, suspicious bank transfer history. I had evidence of how they had diverted money from the college fund my grandmother left me, directing it all towards Sarah's special medical needs. I had recordings of conversations where they discussed how to keep my self-esteem low to prevent me from questioning family decisions. I had collected proof of how my father used his contacts to sabotage my professional opportunities. But the most devastating discovery was hidden on the home office computer: emails between my parents and Sarah's private doctor, discussing for months the possibility of a second emergency donation. The accident wasn't an unexpected tragedy. It was an opportunity they had been waiting for. While they whispered about mental competence and legal loopholes, I already had full access to the family bank accounts thanks to the password my father never changed. I knew about the secret loans he had taken out using my name as collateral. I knew the tax evasion schemes that kept the family's high standard of living. Sarah limped into my room for the first time since the accident, leaning on a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with that familiar determination I knew so well. "Tyler," she whispered, approaching my bed. "I know you can't hear me, but I need to say this. You've always been my hero, you know? When you donated your first kidney, you saved my life. Now I need you to save me again." Tears streamed down her face as she held my hand. "The doctor said that without a quick transplant, I won't be able to go back to Stanford. My whole future, all my dreams, everything depends on you once again." It was almost funny. Sarah genuinely believed she was being emotional and honest with me. She didn't realize she was just repeating the script our parents had rehearsed with her. Those words about hero and saving me again were the same phrases I'd heard my mother use on the phone with distant relatives, explaining how Tyler was a guardian angel to his sister. The truth is, Sarah never saw me as a real brother. I was her personal organ bank, her walking life insurance policy. She took my sacrifices for granted, as something natural, inevitable, deserved. When I donated my first kidney at 21, the thank you party they threw was more a celebration of her survival than an acknowledgement of my sacrifice. But this time it would be different. This time, I wouldn't be the obedient brother who smiles while donating body parts. This time, they would find out that their words have consequences, that their actions have a price, and that underestimating Tyler Chun was the biggest mistake of their lives. Because while they were planning my death, I was planning the rebirth of someone completely new. Someone they had created without realizing it. Someone who knew all their secrets and finally had enough reasons to use them. And when the time came to show them who I really was, they would discover that their limited son had become much more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The next morning, I woke up to voices whispering in the hallway. The digital clock read 3:15 a.m. when I heard my mother talking nervously to someone on the phone. "Dr. Morrison, we need to speed up this process," she said, her voice heavy with urgency. "Sarah is losing strength every day. Tyler isn't going to wake up. The sedatives are keeping him stable. It's the perfect opportunity." I kept my eyes closed, but my heart raced. They were pressuring the doctor to perform the surgery while I was unconscious. The strategy was simple: if I couldn't consciously consent, they would argue that it was a medical emergency that justified the intervention. "I understand your ethical concerns, doctor," my mother continued, now walking closer to my room. "But Tyler has always been a troubled child. Even if he survives, what kind of life would he have? Sarah, on the other hand, has a bright future ahead of her. The choice is obvious. What kind of life would I have?" The question echoed in my mind like a punch in the stomach. To them, my existence was already questionable even before the surgery. I was just an inconvenient obstacle between Sarah and her bright future. 2 hours later, a nurse I didn't recognize entered my room to check my vital signs. Unlike the others, she moved more carefully, checking to see if anyone was in the hallway before approaching my bed. "Tyler," she whispered softly, "I know you're awake. My name is Sandra, and I've been here for 15 years. I've seen many families go through difficult situations, but I've never seen parents talk about a child the way yours talk about you." I opened my eyes slowly, meeting the worried gaze of a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a perfect bun and eyes that showed years of experience dealing with family tragedies. "They're trying to force surgery that could kill you," she continued, checking the door again. "The ethics committee meets tomorrow morning. Your parents have hired a lawyer who specializes in medical cases to argue that you're not mentally capable of making decisions due to the trauma of the accident." My throat was dry, but I managed to whisper, "They can do that?" Sandra shook her head sadly. "If they can prove temporary mental incapacity and Sarah is truly in critical condition, there's a legal loophole. Especially considering you already made a previous donation, voluntarily." The air quotes she made when she said voluntarily reminded me of how that first donation had actually happened. At 21, fresh out of high school, I was emotionally vulnerable and financially dependent. My parents used every manipulative tool they had: emotional blackmail, social isolation, and economic pressure until I agreed to save my little sister. "Is there any way to stop this?" I asked, my voice still weak but determined. Sandra leaned closer, lowering her voice even more. "You need independent legal representation. Someone who has no connection to your family. And you need it before tomorrow's meeting." She slipped a business card discreetly under my pillow. "This lawyer specializes in protecting vulnerable patients from abusive families. She has handled similar cases." When Sandra left, I picked up the card and read, "Rebecca Martinez, Patient Rights Advocate." I memorized the number before hiding the card again. That was the moment I made the decision that would change everything. I would no longer be the obedient son who accepted sacrifices in silence. I wouldn't let them turn me into a pile of replacement organs for Sarah. For the first time in my life, I was going to fight back. But my revenge wouldn't be impulsive or emotional. It would be meticulous, devastating, and definitive. As I waited for the next visiting hour, I began to mentally organize all the resources I had at my disposal. The secret recordings of my parents' conversations. The financial documents I had discreetly photographed over the years. The compromising emails they never imagined I had access to. But the most powerful element in my arsenal was something they never suspected: my independent network of contacts. During the years they treated me like a failure, I had built genuine relationships with people they despised. The mechanic who fixed my used car knew all about my father's tax evasion schemes. The cleaning lady who cleaned my mother's office had told me about documents she found in the trash. The accountant who was unfairly fired from a family business had become my friend and kept copies of compromising files. They thought I was naive and isolated. In fact, I had access to enough information to destroy not only our family but the entire network of corrupt businesses that sustained our lifestyle. When my father showed up late in the afternoon for a quick visit, I kept my eyes closed while he talked on the phone right next to my bed, as if I were a piece of furniture in the living room. "The lawyer said we have an 80% chance of getting approval," he said, clearly pleased. "Tyler has always been emotionally unstable. It won't be hard to prove that the trauma of the accident affected her judgment." Emotionally unstable. Another lie to justify the unjustifiable. The man who never spent more than 10 minutes talking to me was defining my mental state for a court of law. "Sarah needs to be in surgery by the end of the week," he continued. "The longer we wait, the more complicated it gets. Tyler will understand when he wakes up. It's for the good of the family." For the good of the family. The same phrase they used when they diverted my college fund. The same justification for sabotaging my jobs. The same excuse they always used when they hurt me to benefit Sarah. After he left, I called Rebecca Martinez from the hospital phone, pretending to be a medical administration employee who needed to consult about patient rights. "I need legal representation immediately," I said when she answered. "My family is trying to force me into surgery that could kill me, and the ethics committee meeting is tomorrow morning." Rebecca didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 2 hours. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and if anyone tries to medicate you beyond what's necessary for pain, call the nurse immediately." While waiting for the lawyer to arrive, I mentally finalized the first phase of my revenge plan. Not only would I prevent the forced surgery, but I would use this moment to publicly expose every crime, every manipulation, and every act of abuse my parents had committed over the years. They wanted my second kidney? Perfect. In return, I would take everything they had built at the expense of my dignity. Her reputation, her business, her social relationships, her financial security, all of it would become my trophy. Sarah limped into my room in the late afternoon, leaning on her crutches, her face pale but determined. For the first time since the accident, she seemed genuinely concerned about me. "Tyler, the doctors say you could wake up at any moment," she said, sitting carefully in the chair next to my bed. "When that happens, I need you to understand something important." I kept my eyes closed, but I listened to every word. "I know it's a lot to ask after everything you've done for me," she continued, tears beginning to fall. "But the doctors said that without an immediate transplant, I won't be able to go back to Stanford. All my dreams, my whole life, it all depends on you once again." Even pretending to be unconscious, I felt a twinge of pain in my chest. Sarah truly believed that I should sacrifice my life for her dreams. She had been so molded by our parents that she couldn't even see the monstrosity of what she was asking. "I promise that if you do this for me, I will honor your memory forever," she whispered. "I will become the doctor I always dreamed of being, and I will dedicate my career to saving people like you. People like me." She truly saw my death as something noble, a sacrifice that would give purpose to my previously worthless existence. It was in that moment that I realized Sarah wasn't just a victim of our parents' manipulation. She was an active participant, a conscious beneficiary of the system that made me disposable. When Rebecca Martinez arrived that night, disguised as a medical consultant to avoid suspicion, we began to devise a strategy that would not only protect my life, but ensure that the whole truth about the Chin family came to light. "They don't know who they're messing with," Rebecca said after hearing my full story. "We have enough evidence not only to stop the surgery, but to prosecute them for attempted murder, financial fraud, and continued psychological abuse." I smiled for the first time in days. Not a smile of joy, but one of anticipation. My parents had built their entire lives on lies, manipulation, and exploitation. Tomorrow, when the ethics committee met, they would discover that the son they had always underestimated had become the architect of their own destruction. And while they slept peacefully, confident that they would get my second kidney in the morning, I was awake making the final adjustments to the plan that would transform Tyler Chun from victim to avenger. Rebecca Martinez worked all night, turning my hospital bed into a legal command center. Documents were scattered across the nightstand, her laptop was open with audio recordings being transcribed, and a growing pile of evidence would make any prosecutor smile. "Tyler, this goes beyond stopping a forced surgery," she said, adjusting her glasses as she flipped through the files on her notebook. "With this evidence, we're talking criminal charges. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, systematic financial manipulation." The plan we devised was simple on the surface, but devastating in its execution. First, we would prevent the ethics committee meeting from taking place by presenting evidence of family coercion. Second, we would publicly expose every crime my parents had committed over the years. Third, we would ensure that they faced every possible legal consequence. But the most satisfying part of the plan was how we would use their own weapons against them. For years, my parents had built an impeccable reputation in Seattle's Chinese community. My father was respected as an honest businessman, my mother as a dedicated philanthropist. They attended charity dinners, sponsored cultural events, and positioned themselves as moral pillars of society. That entire facade would be destroyed in a matter of hours. "Timing is crucial," Rebecca explained, checking her watch. "The committee meeting is at 8 in the morning. At 7:30, we'll deliver complete copies of all the evidence to the Seattle Times, Cairo News, and every local Asian American news blog. While she organized the legal strategy, I mentally finalized the emotional strategy. I would call every relative, every family friend, every business contact my parents respected. One conversation at a time, telling my side of the story before they could control the narrative. What motivated me most wasn't anger, but clarity. For the first time in my life, I had the power to protect other people from going through what I had gone through. Other disposable children, other manipulated relatives, other victims of toxic families who used blood ties as chains. Around 5 in the morning, Sandra appeared in my room with an update that changed everything. "Tyler, I need to tell you something," she said, checking to see if anyone was in the hallway. "I overheard a conversation between your parents and their lawyer in the parking lot. They're not just trying to force the surgery. They're planning to transfer you to a private psychiatric clinic after the operation." My blood ran cold. A private psychiatric clinic meant complete isolation. No access to a phone, no contact with the outside world, no chance to expose the truth. They could keep me there indefinitely, claiming that the trauma of the surgery had caused a mental breakdown. "They've already signed the involuntary commitment papers," Sandra continued. "The plan is to perform the surgery this morning and transfer you this afternoon, before you have a chance to talk to anyone." Rebecca immediately grabbed the phone, calling contacts at the courthouse. "We need an emergency injunction. Now." As she spoke rapidly with judges and prosecutors, I realized that my parents had devised the perfect plan to silence me permanently. Steal my kidney, destroy my mental credibility, and lock me away where I could never bother them again. But they made one fatal mistake. They completely underestimated how much preparation I had done. During the years they treated me like I was invisible. I had documented everything. Every suspicious bank transfer, every compromising conversation, every questionable legal document. I had created digital backups stored in multiple cloud accounts, with instructions to be released automatically if anything happened to me. If you're following this story of family manipulation, subscribe to the channel because what happened at the ethics committee meeting was just the beginning of a twist that no one, not even me, was completely prepared to witness. At 6:30 a.m., as my parents arrived at the hospital confident that they would finalize my fate, Rebecca received the call we had been waiting for. "We did it," she said, hanging up the phone with a fierce smile. "Injunction granted. Transfer blocked. And even better, the judge has authorized a full criminal investigation into medical coercion and financial abuse." It was time to show the Chin family that the son they had always considered disposable had become far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. And when the doors of that hospital opened for the committee meeting, it wouldn't just be my life that would change forever. At 7:55 a.m., my parents arrived at the hospital with the confidence of people who already considered the game won. My mother carried a folder with psychiatric admission documents, while my father talked on the phone with the lawyer, finalizing the last legal details. "Yes, as soon as the surgery is over, he'll go straight to Evergreen Clinic," he said, walking down the hall. 3 months of involuntary hospitalization should be enough for him to accept his new reality. They entered the ethics committee room to find a table full of doctors, hospital administrators, and to her surprise, Rebecca Martinez sitting next to a man they didn't recognize, Assistant District Attorney Michael Crawford. "Where's Tyler?" my mother asked, checking her watch. The surgery was scheduled for 8 o'clock. "About that," said Dr. Morrison, adjusting his glasses nervously. "There have been some legal complications that have arisen overnight." That's when the doors opened and I walked in on my own 2 feet, wearing a hospital gown but completely lucid and determined. The shock on my parents' faces was instant and delicious. "Tyler!" my mother cried, jumping up from her chair. "You should be sedated. How are you walking?" "Hello, Mom." "Dad," I said calmly, sitting down in the chair Rebecca had reserved for me. "Sorry for the drama, but I needed to make sure you were fully committed to your plan before revealing that I've been awake this whole time." The silence in the room was deafening. My father opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water, while my mother clung to the edge of the table to keep her balance. You heard everything," she whispered, her face draining of color. "Every poisonous word," I replied, my voice echoing in the silent room. "Including the part where you called me dead weight, and planned my death to save Sarah. And also the part about the psychiatric clinic to silence me after the surgery." Rebecca stood up, opening her briefcase with meticulously organized documents. "Gentlemen of the committee, I would like to present evidence of family coercion, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. The first audio she played was my parents' conversation with the doctor, recorded on my cell phone 3 days earlier. Their own voices filled the room. He's always been a dead weight. At least this way he'll be good for something in his life. My father tried to stand up. That's illegal. Recording without consent. Actually, interrupted Prosecutor Crawford, recordings in environments where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy are completely admissible, especially when they document criminal activity. Rebecca continued to present evidence after evidence. Emails between my parents discussing how to maintain my emotional dependence for future medical needs. Bank transfers showing how they diverted my college fund to expensive experimental treatments for Sarah. Documents proving how they sabotaged my job opportunities to keep me available. What you have created, I said, standing up and facing them directly, is a system where I existed solely as an organ bank for Sarah. You systematically destroyed my self-esteem, sabotaged my future, and conditioned me to accept any sacrifice for the family. My mother began to cry, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of someone who had just realized she had completely lost control of the situation. Tyler, you don't understand, she pleaded. Sarah has so much potential. She can save lives as a doctor. You were never academic like her. Never been academic. Rebecca laughed coldly, pulling out another document. Tyler had a full scholarship to study biomedical engineering at Stanford before you sabotaged his paperwork. His SAT scores were in the 98th percentile before they mysteriously disappeared from the system. The revelation hit my parents like a punch in the stomach. They never knew I found out about Stanford. For years they believed I was truly academically inferior, when in fact they actively destroyed every opportunity one had. But the most interesting part, I continued, feeling a cold satisfaction wash over me, is that you did all this for nothing. Sarah didn't need my second kidney. The silence in the room grew even heavier. All eyes turned to me. Explain that, said Dr. Morrison, clearly confused. Rebecca smiled, revealing our final trump card. We had Tyler undergo independent medical tests last night. His kidneys are functioning perfectly, but more importantly, he has a blood type that is completely incompatible with Sarah for a kidney transplant. Impossible, my father shouted. The tests from 2 years ago showed complete compatibility. Tests that were falsified by Dr. Peterson, who was under investigation by the medical board for fraudulent practices, replied Prosecutor Crawford. The first kidney Tyler donated to Sarah? It came from a cadaveric donor through the regular transplant program. Tyler underwent completely unnecessary and traumatic surgery. The room exploded in shocked murmurs. Some committee members stood up, clearly outraged. My parents stood frozen, processing the magnitude of their manipulation being exposed. You cut me open and made me believe I saved my sister's life, I said, my voice growing in intensity. You made me carry that emotional responsibility for 2 years, using it to justify every additional sacrifice you forced me to make. Sarah was brought into the room at that moment, pushed in her wheelchair by a nurse. Her face was pale, but not from illness, from total shock at hearing everything that was being revealed. Tyler, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about Stanford, about the fake exams, about any of this. I know you didn't know, Sarah, I replied softly. You were manipulated just as much as I was. The difference is that you were protected and pampered, while I was sabotaged and sacrificed. Prosecutor Crawford stood up, addressing my parents. Robert and Linda Chun, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, medical fraud, financial abuse, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. As my father was handcuffed, he shouted one last desperate plea, Tyler, we're your family. You can't do this to us. I paused at the door, looking back one last time. Family doesn't sabotage their children's dreams. Family doesn't lie about unnecessary surgeries. And family definitely doesn't plan to kill one child to benefit another. As they were led away by security, Sarah took my hand for the first time in years. What's going to happen to us now? She asked, her voice small and scared. Now, I said, helping her up from the wheelchair. She was physically stronger than she let on. We're going to learn how to be real siblings. No lies, no manipulation, no one of us being sacrificed for the other. But as we walked down the hospital hallway together, I knew that the real twist was yet to come. Because what my parents never found out is that I wasn't just the victim in this story. I became the architect of a new reality they could never have imagined. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new law office in downtown Seattle, reading the headlines in the Seattle Times. Former Chin executive sentenced to 10 years for attempted murder and medical fraud. The photo showed my parents being escorted to prison, the handcuffs glinting in the camera flashes. The trial had been a devastating spectacle. Every piece of evidence Rebecca presented systematically destroyed the reputation they had built over decades. The emails about keeping me emotionally dependent were read aloud. The recordings where they called me dead weight echoed through the courtroom. The fraudulent bank transfers were projected onto giant screens. But the most devastating evidence was the testimony of Dr. Peterson, who confessed under immunity how he had falsified my medical records in exchange for $50,000. The courtroom fell silent when he admitted that I never needed surgery, that my first kidney had been removed completely without medical necessity. "What strikes me most," said the judge during sentencing, "is the calculated coldness with which the defendants planned not only to exploit, but potentially murder their own child for the benefit of another. This goes beyond parental negligence, it is documented sociopathy." My father tried one last emotional appeal during his testimony. "Your Honor, we just wanted the best for our family. Tyler was always difficult. Sarah had so much potential." But his words only confirmed everything I had alleged. Even facing a decade in prison, he still couldn't see the fundamental moral error in treating me as disposable. Sarah, who was now living with me while attending psychology school at the University of Washington, sat in the audience throughout the sentencing. Tears streamed down her face, not out of sadness for her parents, but out of anger at finally understanding the system of abuse that had benefited them for years. "Tyler," she whispered after her parents were led away, "how can you forgive me for being a part of this?" "Because you were a victim too, Sarah," I replied, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "They shaped you to accept my sacrifices as natural. You never had a chance to develop genuine empathy or understand healthy reciprocity. But now you do." Sarah's transformation had been radical. After discovering the truth about my fake exams and unnecessary sacrifices, she insisted on paying for therapy for both of us with the money she inherited from our grandmother, money our parents never managed to steal because it was in an ironclad trust fund. She switched from medicine to psychology, focusing on family trauma and parental manipulation. "I want to help other families identify these patterns before they get to the point we got to," she explained during one of our joint therapy sessions. 3 months after the trial, I launched my own organization, the Second Chance Foundation, a legal advocacy center for young adults who are victims of medical and financial abuse by their families. Using the settlement money I received from a hospital and Dr. Peterson's clinic, I created a support network for people who had gone through what I had. The first case we took on was a 19-year-old girl whose parents wanted to force her to donate part of her liver to her alcoholic brother. The second was a young man whose parents had stolen his identity to take out fraudulent loans. The third was twin girls who discovered they had been adopted specifically to serve as an organ bank for a third sister with a rare genetic disease. Every story we heard confirmed that our experience was not isolated. There was a silent epidemic of families treating some children as disposable resources for others. "What you're doing goes beyond revenge," Rebecca said during our monthly case review meeting. "You've turned personal trauma into systematic protection for others. That's human evolution in its purest form." 6 months after the conviction, I received an unexpected phone call. It was an investigative journalist from CNN interested in doing a documentary series on medical abuse within families. "Your story has become a catalyst," she explained. "At least 50 families have contacted us with similar situations after your story became public. If you are watching this story and recognize similar patterns in your own family, know that you are not alone and that resources are available. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and transformation that can save lives." The documentary series aired 8 months later, and the impact was immense. Hospitals across the United States implemented stricter protocols for family transplants. 3 states passed specific laws criminalizing medical coercion by family members. The Tyler Chin Law became a national model for protecting young adults from medical exploitation by relatives. Sarah graduated magna cum laude and now works as a family trauma therapist at our center. She has developed an innovative protocol for identifying abusive dynamics in families seeking medical treatment for their children. The interesting thing, she told me recently, is how therapy helped me understand that our parents were also victims of their own parents. Grandpa always treated Dad like he was disposable compared to his favorite brother. Mom grew up in a family where women were valued only for their ability to care for men. That explains their behavior, I replied, but it doesn't excuse it. They had decades to break the cycle and chose to perpetuate it. On the second anniversary of our legal victory, we hosted a benefit for the foundation. Over 300 people attended, including survivors we had helped, families who had reconciled through our therapy, and medical professionals who had implemented our protocols. During my speech, I looked at Sarah in the front row and said, "Your biological family is like the house you're born in. You don't choose the architecture, the foundation, or the structural problems. But real family is like a house you build. You choose every material, every design, every person who comes in." Sarah and I demolished the toxic house we grew up in and built something completely new, based on genuine love, mutual respect, and mutual protection. The latest news I've received about my parents came through Sarah, who still visits them occasionally in prison. My father has developed serious heart problems and finally understands the irony of potentially needing an organ transplant while serving time for trying to force one. My mother attends mandatory prison therapy and, according to Sarah, is showing genuine remorse for the first time. "She asks about you constantly," Sarah said. "She wants to know if you would ever be able to forgive her." "Forgiveness is possible," I replied. "But reconciliation requires trust rebuilt through consistent actions, not just words." They destroyed that trust so systematically that it would take a lifetime of genuine change to rebuild it. Last week, I received an email that made me stop everything I was doing. It was from a family in Portland, thanking our foundation for preventing them from forcing their 16-year-old daughter to donate a kidney to her brother. "You saved our family from destroying itself," they wrote. "We are now in therapy together and learning healthy ways to support our 2 children." I closed my laptop and walked over to my office window, watching Seattle move below. 5 years ago, I was in a hospital bed listening to my parents plan my death. Today, I run an organization that has protected more than 200 families from similar dynamics. The revenge I sought was never about destroying my parents. It was about building a world where other children would never have to go through what I did. The real victory wasn't seeing them in prison, but seeing families heal, young people protect themselves, and a silent epidemic finally being recognized and fought. If this story of transformation and overcoming adversity has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now for more real stories of people who have turned their deepest pain into purpose and protection for others. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is not destroying those who hurt you, but building something so powerful that it prevents others from going through the same pain. As I type these final words, Sarah is in the next room helping a desperate mother whose ex-husband is trying to force their 15-year-old daughter into unnecessary surgery. The cycle our parents perpetuated for generations has ended with us. And when I look in the mirror now, I no longer see the disposable boy they raised. I see Tyler Chun, protector of families, builder of hope, and living proof that sometimes the most brutal betrayal can become the catalyst for the most powerful transformation. The last time I thought of them with anger was 2 years ago. Now, when I think of them, I feel only gratitude. Because without their cruelty, I would never have discovered my true mission, to ensure that no child is treated as a disposable pawn in the power games of adults. They tried to use me as an organ bank. I became a bank of hope for hundreds of families. In the end, who really won?